I want to give you an update on some of the work that we've been doing kind of behind the scenes in the last 2 months. It's part of the here and now process. COVID, of course, has upturned most of how we live our lives and how we do much of church. But for a long time, we've had questions about how we should best leverage our community, how we should structure ourselves so that we are able to really fulfill our mission in meaningful ways. And with the pandemic entering its, sixth month, and questions about the role of community circles and their sustainability were kind of rising, a group of circle leaders started to ask this question. Like, how might we imagine structures for how we as a community engage that would foster spiritual grounding and resilience, deepening belonging, and unleashing us as agents of courageous love? And how do we do that in a sustainable yet adaptive way? We realized that we needed to be really intentional about how we answered this question because there's a lot of ways we could go, and we wanted to really connect in with the congregation, with our community, to see where they were at and let their insights drive this process. And so we partnered with a nonprofit design firm agency, that's their name, out of Boston, who worked with us to create a process in which we could engage with this question, but also engage with our community. They helped us create a process in which 7 teams worked for 7 weeks, composed of 34 members of our congregation, and they worked on moving through a human-centered design process. So what that looked like is we spent time learning about our congregation. Then we spent time analyzing the information, the data that we gathered from the congregation. And once we did some of that analysis, then we moved into a design phase where the groups created different imaginings, different ideas that each week they worked through. At the beginning, they completed 75 hours of interviews with members of our community. 75 hours. All totaled, the summaries of those interviews was 22 pages long. We really got to know not only some of the barriers that people are facing to experiencing belonging, but what it really means to feel like you're a part of a community, that you're able to access hope, to feel oriented and grounded. And so they took all of that insight, and each week they came up with different ideas. And then they shared them with one another. They got feedback, they refined them. Agency pushed us to deepen them and see how they could be more expansive, more comprehensive. And in the end, the groups came up with a cadre of amazing ideas about how we might structure ourselves, how we might have different opportunities to connect with each other, enable elders to be connecting. How do we do justice and outreach in a really grounded and holistic way? How do we hear each other's stories? And the core team took all of these information, all of the insights from the interviews, all of the insights about these creative solutions to how we might structure ourselves to be able to sustainably and adaptively meet those 3 outcomes. And they came to a few fundamental insights. The first insight is that our stories, not only ours, but hearing each other's stories, are foundational and transformative. And we need to create structures where we can actively hear and seek out each other's stories. The second insight is that we as a congregation need to do some work to make our social system more visible and accessible. Many of the ideas were about how do we leverage our gifts? How do we know what other people are doing? How do we collaborate? How do we see what's going on? And we realized that many groups, many individuals feel that the church is a little bit obscure. It's hard to understand what's going on. And so we need to do some work to make that visible and accessible in ways that'll enhance our capacity to do this work. The third insight was that there's a big desire for us to be in it together. And what that meant is that we want to wrestle together with the big questions and be able to collaborate. And so we need to think about structures that will allow us to break down the silos and the traditional places that that conversations are happening in the church and allow a more creative and a more emergent process, which of course leads to this other insight, which is that we need to embrace emergence. We need to think about how we equip ourselves to follow new ideas, to create feedback systems that keep us accountable and on mission, but also how do we train ourselves to deal with the complexities of not only our congregational system, but the world. And finally, that we need ways to relationally companion one another, companion newcomers into our congregation, companion leaders as they step into leadership, companion people as they're going through critical life stages, that we need to have different structures and a real culture of companionship. So what happens next? The core team is working to figure out a plan for our community circles. How are they transformed, and to unleash them in the places they're working and let go of the parts that aren't. And then we're going to be gathering teams around each of these insights. And they're going to take a specific question that is at the heart of it, and they're going to try some experiments. And so in January, we're going to begin this work of experimenting and seeing what we learn about how to actually implement these insights throughout our congregation, and how do we do it in conversation amongst all of those groups. It's been phenomenal experience to work with this group of 34 members of our congregation who dedicated hours of their time over these past 7-8 weeks. The work that they've done is so good and so foundational, and is setting us up for some amazing moments to come. And so I'm so grateful for them. I'm so grateful for Agency, our partner, and I'm so grateful for this congregation's spirit of learning, because it's serving us well in a time in which we need to learn and adapt to whatever is to come.